Oh, that was you, huh? Well, boys, today is the day. But before we discuss that, we gotta discuss something else. Coda is freaking out because he knows he's in trouble. I was questioning at first, who did this? I woke up, came out in the kitchen, and someone knocked over all of Bobby's cookies. And as you can see, Coda is seemingly a little bit guilty. Is that you? That was definitely Coda. I don't think Bane would have the energy to do this. That was you, huh? You fatty. I'm excited, man. Today we are gonna start the assembly process of our 4G63 2.3 liter build for the Evo 8 project. Now, we can't get it completely done. There's a couple little things that we're missing. Let's just say we're gonna do a short block build because I don't have valve stem seals. I don't have the bearings for the balance shaft. Even when you do a balance shaft delete, you still need the bearings in there. You just take them, you rotate them. We'll discuss that later on. But for now, check out this beautiful banger egg breakfast we got going on here. I eat really, really early in the morning, 4 to 5 a.m. And then I don't eat till I get home. Usually 9:30, 10 p.m. It's been working for me. And I just feel great all day. It's just a little bit tough eating an ample amount of calories at night. And also, I've noticed, if I don't have any carbs in the morning or throughout the whole entire day until evening, that also helps with my sustained energy levels a lot. Now, of course, you need a quality amount of sleep to feel good as well, which that's always something I lack on. But last night, I got some good sleep. We went to bed early-ish, so I feel great. You know, I guess that's kind of a lie, kind of a little bit of a fib. I do have carbs in the morning, every morning. AG1 has 6 calories in it, or not calories, 50 calories, and 6 grams of carbs, if I'm not mistaken. So I know that's not a substantial amount of carbohydrates, but I do feel like it's very important to get not only macronutrients in, which is all your calories, carb, fat, protein type of thing, but also micronutrients. Okie dokie, let's get this party started. Let's do a quick breakdown and run through everything that we got going on here, because as you can see, there's a lot. So right here is our freshly machined block, resurfaced deck area, bored and honed to 86.5 mil. Piston wall clearance was set to 045. Resurfaced up front. Now down here we went ahead with the ARP main studs, had it line honed, and then we topped it off with a fresh coating of high temp 1200 degree rated Cerakote. So this thing is absolutely brand new and ready to run. Now on this table here we have the Cerakoted oil pan, BC valve springs and retainers, new plugs, oil pump, timing kit, some gaskets, the fresh cylinder head, new water pump, the oil filter housing. And then over here on this table, more random stuff on this side, cam gears and whatnot, ARP head studs, all the ACL main and rod bearings, thrust bearings or thrust washers, HKS 272 cams, and then what I'm very excited for is this stuff here. So this is our Manly 2.3 liter stroker kit. Manly crankshaft, 100 mil stroke, 150 mil Manly I-beam rods with a set of 86.5 millimeter CP pistons. Of course, we got the rings, the pins, and the locks. So let's get cracking on this short block. We are going to start out with, of course, all of the bearing clearances, which that should all be good to go. Everything there should measure out just fine. We are just double checking work to make sure it meets our tolerances that we want. So rod bearing clearances, main bearing clearances, and then we need to go ahead and check the piston to wall clearance. We do need to set the ring end gap as well. And then when those 4 things are, ow, just bit my cheek. When those 4 things are finished up, we can move on to assembly. So the first thing we're going to start off with is, let's start with the mainline clearance. Now there are 2 different ways you can go about measuring the mainline clearance and the rod bearing clearances. You can use tools, or you can use what is called plastic gauge. Plastic gauge, you will put all the bearings in, put the crank in, go ahead and put a little piece of, it's literal plastic that squishes as you tighten down, say the main cap or the girdle, as I call it. And then you'll unbolt the girdle and you'll take the plastic gauge measuring, not calculator, but measuring gauge, I guess you would say. And you hold it up to the plastic gauge and that'll give you your bearing clearance, your oil clearance. Now that is a pretty good option. That's what I used to do in the past. But I do feel that using the proper tooling is more accurate. I find it to be quicker. The only downside is that, of course, you gotta buy the tools, which it's a one-time purchase. It's expensive, but it's not that bad. Now how we're gonna do that is pull off all these main nuts here. As soon as all the nuts and washers are off, the girdle, I might need a plastic hammer. Girdle will pop off. Now I trust the machine shop that does all my work, but I am gonna personally go through and clean this thing again. The last thing we want is any sort of gunk, especially metal shavings from the bore or anything floating around this motor. So I'm gonna pop these studs out, grab our compressed air, grab our brake cleaner, and just run through, get everything cleaned up. Make sure it's 100% spotless. If I see any boogered threads, I will go ahead and chase those. And just make sure this thing's gonna assemble smoothly. Now with everything cleaned up, we're gonna take our bearings. These are a set of ACL, the standard size main bearings, and we're gonna check the bearing oil clearance. Now there are two different types on the bearing shell. We have this guy here with no groove, okay? This guy here with the groove. This one goes on the block. These guys go on the main cap or girdle. For today's video, I'm calling it a girdle. So we're gonna slop these guys on in here. This bearing tang, the little tab right there, will fit nicely into the recessed area on the girdle. All those guys are in place. Now, we're gonna go ahead and pop the bearing shells into the block as well. All right, let's go ahead and get the main studs into the block per ARP's instructions. And I know I've seen comments about this in the past that I'm doing it wrong, but all I'm doing is following the manufacturer's instructions. The studs hand tight into the block. Now, of course, when you go to put the nut on and the washer on, those get torqued to a high torque spec. But stud into the block, just hand tight. To make this go a little bit faster, I am gonna just run them in with the impact until they almost bottom out, and then finish it with my hand. If you notice any sort of binding, pull the stud out and fix the threads or fix whatever's going on. Just to make sure they're actually at the bottom, I'm putting maybe a 2 inch-pound of torque on these things, just to make sure there's no, just to make sure they're actually seated all the way. Hand tight plus 2 inch-pounds. Okay, those are good to go. Grab the girdle and get her in place. Top and bottom of the washer and the threads on the nut, or the threads on the stud you can also do, all get some ARP fastener lube. I do prefer and like to do this as I'm checking bearing clearances as well, because the torque changes with lube. You don't need a whole lot, just enough so they are fully covered. And then I personally find it easier to just lube the threads on the stud instead of trying to get it into the nut. The main studs are going to be torqued to a final torque of 60 foot-pounds, but in 3 equal steps. So we're going to start off with 20 foot-pounds, and we're not going to torque them all in a line. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it applies an even load to the whole girdle. So 20, and then 40, and then a final of 60. Now, utilizing our snap T gauge, we're gonna go ahead and measure the ID of journal 1. Put it in that little bit of a sideways angle, put a little tension on it so it stays when you pull it out. Flatten her out. And now we need to measure this dimension right here. I like digital mics. I know that's not what a true machinist would use, but that's what I run. So it's easy to read. Put it in inches, and we are looking at 2.06905. I like to write everything down. 2.06905. Okay, let's go ahead and measure out the entire main line on the block, write all that down, pull up the crank, measure the journals on the crank, and then we go from there. The full main line is measured 2.0695 on every single one. Just line honed, so it makes sense as to why they're all 100% identical. Alrighty, let's grab our crankshaft, make sure there ain't no debris on it. And now we're gonna be using these guys to go ahead and measure the journals. Okay. 2.0671. That, of course, is number 1. So 2.0671 will give us a bearing clearance of 0.00. So 9, 5 minus 7, 1, 0024. I'm going to repeat that process with 2 through 5. Come back and make sure all of our clearances are good to go. 7, 1 again. So that's going to give us, we have an 0024, 0024, 00235, and a 024 and a 0024. Tiny bit looser than I would typically run on a main line, but there's no such thing as an undersized bearing. It's not out of spec by any means, but typically I would see an 020 to an 0022. 0024 is plenty kosher. Let's go ahead and measure out the rod bearing clearance. We already have the crank up here, so let's just knock this out now. 5581, 5581. So they're all 1.5581. So what we did with the block and the girdle is kind of what we're gonna do. Same concept as to what we're gonna do with the rods. We're gonna split them apart, put the bearing shells in, torque down the bolts, the rod bolts, and measure out the ID of the bearing races. Now each rod cap that comes off has to stick with that rod. So as you can see, these are all marked. Rod's marked number 1 right there, and this is inscribed number 1 right there. I find the best way to split the rod without damaging anything is just unthread the bolt a little bit. Put your fingers on the bottom side of this cap here and just tap on the head of the bolt and it'll split. Okay, rod bearing time. Same old ACL race bearings. Now if you remember on the main line, they were different. Rods, they're all the same. bearing tang, need to be on the same side. A little bit of fastener lube on this, on the head and the threads. Now the torque spec all depends on the lube. If you're using the ARP fastener lube like we are, they say to go to 45 foot-pounds, but you can also use a 30 weight engine oil, and if you do that, they say go all the way to 60 foot-pounds. Pretty interesting how much it varies with just the lube. So I'm gonna start off at 20 foot-pounds on both. Just to get the cap seated properly. And then bumper to 45. Okay. Now, grab these good old boys. Grab the ID of that and measure it out on the mic. 1.5606. Quick math equation. 1.5606 minus 1.5581. 0025 is what I got on that one. Final measurements of the oil clearances on the mains, all 0024, rods 0025. Last thing to measure is the piston to wall clearance. I could definitely skip this and I'd feel comfortable skipping this. Let's do it anyway. We're gonna measure the piston first. Too small. So you wanna measure the skirt about midway, right about here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and lock that in. And then grab our bore gauge. This is a Fowler bore gauge, 0.0001 increment. And we need to set the bore gauge to this ID right here. So that's a 3.35, let's grab a 3.2. Should work perfect. And we're just gonna put the bore gauge in here. Imagine that, it's already zeroed out. Wow, I've never had that happen. Start off with cylinder 1. We put the bore gauge in and slowly rotate it back. How far it goes past 0, so how far it goes past this point right here on the gauge is our piston to wall clearance, which you can see 040, 041, 042. Now you want to check it on the top of the bore, middle of the bore, bottom of the bore. Rotate it, top, middle, bottom on the, when you rotate it as well. This thing is absolutely beautiful. So our piston to wall clearance, we were shooting for a 0045. I'm seeing 0042, 0043. But then again, that could vary because when they do bore and line or finish hone this thing, it is with the torque plate. So as soon as we bolt the head down, it does distort things a little bit. When you torque the mains down, it can distort and twist things. I'm very happy with those numbers. It may change, like I said, a little bit when everything's torqued down. And that's why you should use a machine shop that has a torque plate for your build. Well, everything is done. Everything's measured out. We're almost ready to start building. The very last thing that we need to do is just go ahead and set the piston ring end gap. So we need to file, we're gonna check the oil scraper rings and we're gonna file the compression rings. There's 2 compression rings, top and a bottom. And then, like I said, just double check that the oil scraper ring end gaps are good to go. I have ran into it before where they are way too tight and you go to put the piston in and it don't fit and you don't know why. It's very, very rare, but I have ran into that issue before. So for ring end gap, we need to measure it for starters. Place it down into the associated cylinder hole. Take your piston, flip it over, and press the ring down evenly, okay? For the top ring, we're going for a 0.018 ring end gap. And as you can see, she don't fit. So we bring her over to our ring end gap filing tool. Very carefully and slowly and squarely file that ring end gap. Now, I prefer to go a little bit at a time. I'm sure if you built a motor before or many motors before, if you've been in a rush and you're trying to get this done quick and you overblow it and you make your ring end gap twice the size of it should be, waiting on new rings is not a good day. So just take it slow. Nice and easy. The last thing to rush is a good old high horsepower 2.3 liter engine build, or any engine build for that matter. So I go 018 on the top ring for this bore size, 018 on the top ring, 020 on the second compression ring. And now we are ready to go ahead and move forward with getting the rings onto the pistons. I always use the same exact diagram. This is what I do, this right here. Ring end gap, so the piston pin center line, top ring end gap, second ring end gap, oil rail top, oil rail bottom, oil rail expander. Markings on the ring go up, and at the off chance that your rings do not have a marking, the top ring, the bevel, goes to the top. The second compression ring, the bevel, will go down. Okay, so let's get this done. Oil expander ring first. Go ahead and get that guy on there. I do all the oil rings first. So it goes the expander, bottom rail, top rail. Now I have used a ring expander tool before. I don't like them. I'd rather just do it by hand. Every time I use one of those tools, I feel like I'm just going to break the rings. Second, and then the top ring. Markings go up. Make sure they move freely in their grooves. Piston one's done. So here we have everything laid out. The pistons, the rods, the wrist pins, 4 of the clips. We already have, if you look in here, we placed 1 clip on each. We already inserted 1 clip onto each of the pistons. Let's go ahead and hang the pistons on the rods, and then we can start assembling. Crank goes in, pistons go in with the rod, connect to the crankshaft, and it's time to party. This is the assembly lube I'll be using today. Not my favorite. I mean, it does the trick when you're in a pinch and you forget to order your favorite beforehand. But we are going to go ahead and lube where the wrist pin goes. Can't have anything running dry right off the bat. I'm going to lube the wrist pin itself. Okay. Take our piston, install onto the rod. Take your pin, slide her through, make sure everything rotates like it should. And now the fun part. Sometimes these go in easy, other times they can be a pain. So I got my tiny electrical depinning tool here. See if these guys will just pop on in. Okay, circlip is in. I used to think that the gap on the clip should be lined up with that hole. Please don't do that, otherwise it'll be a pain to get the clips back out if you ever have to rebuild your engine. How you get them out, you'll put a little flat header pick down there, pry up, and it pops the clip out. So I'm gonna get all these hanging how they should, and we can get to assembly. It is assembly time. Let's pop this girdle back off and go ahead and slap in our manly crankshaft. Now typically I'd pull this girdle, go ahead and slap in all the oil squirters, but a lot of times with these builds, varying different pistons have different specs, of course. And a lot of times you have to bend the oil squirter a little bit, which I'm assuming we're probably gonna have to do on this build as well. A lot of people will delete them, but we are gonna be running them and just bending the nozzle here. Just a slight tweak on this nozzle. We'll get it out of the way so it clears the piston skirt. Time for a little bit of lube on the bearings. Good, just put a nice thinnish coat on here. Doesn't need to be crazy thick. Just enough so they ain't running dry. And now, very important, do not forget your thrust bearings. Grooved side goes out toward the crank, flat side goes in toward the block. These things always tend to fall out. So I take a little bit of assembly lube, put it on the block, and it kind of acts as a glue, I guess you could say, to hold these thrust washers in place. Lube up the front side, and now we are ready for the beautiful manly crankshaft. Be careful dropping her in, try not to hit the studs at all. And definitely try not to pop those thrust washers out of their groove. Bam, 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 just like that. We're ready for the girdle. A bit of lube on this guy, of course. And she's ready to party. Give her a few light taps. This doesn't make any sense. The crank hits the block. So we may have to clearance the block just a tiny bit. That's a little bit frustrating because this thing is perfectly clean. As you can see though, when you rotate it, she hits and gets stuck. I had never heard of that before, but maybe that's common knowledge that I just don't know about. That's frustrating. So as we rotate this thing back around, it looks like we're gonna have to shave the block a little bit right down here and right here. The weights of the crank are hitting there and there. Once again, it's not a big deal. A little bit annoying, but it's not gonna be hard to clearance. I'm just trying to make sure there's no other places that she may come in contact with. Quite interesting. So if you're doing a 2-3 build, or maybe it's a manly crank thing, just know you might have to clearance your block. So do that before you get everything cleaned. Let's pull her all back apart, plug off all the holes, and give her the clearance she's wanting. I'm glad I caught this now. It could have been something where I just didn't even check to see if the crank spins freely, but I'm sure glad that I did. Just a little bit of a nub right there, right there. I wonder if I could just use a file. Couple minutes on the file on each of those nubs. We should be back in business. Alrighty, everything is cleaned back up. Let's toss in our bearings, do a quick test fit, and make sure this thing clears. Kind of a hassle, but such is life with building engines. Sometimes you just gotta do silly things. Using a file was a good move. It was easy to make sure we didn't fill the holes at all, any of the oil galleys with metal. Of course, I still cleaned it afterwards, but just reduces the risk of getting gunk everywhere. Slap the bearings back in, toss on the crank, and rotate her around. Okay. Please clear. Ugh, dang. So close. Is there anything else that's gonna need clearance while it comes back out? I mean, it spins, but I can feel it just hardly touch it. Okay, let's pop her back out. Alrighty, crankshaft going in, finally. For the last time. Everything's clearanced up, re-cleaned, re-lubed. And just like that, I lose a thrust washer. Okay, we have all the clearance in the world now. Oh yeah, we are good to move forward with this project. Yay. It's about an hour setback, but not a big deal. Always kind of fun, if I'm being honest, learning new things. I had no idea this was even gonna be a possibility, but now I know, and I can share that with you guys if you're gonna do a manly 2-3. Beautiful. Alrighty, hardware can go back on. The lube we applied earlier should be an ample amount, so we should be fine there. You don't want a crazy ton of amount of lube anyway, just enough for proper torque. and whatnot. Once again, 60 foot-pound final torque spec, 3 equal steps, 20, 40, 60, in a crisscross pattern to get proper clamping distribution. Starting with the middle, working your way out. Crank is in, fully torqued down, and she spins like she should. Let's flip this guy over, get them pistons and rods in this old girl. Ugh. Iron blocks are so freaking heavy. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We are gonna go ahead, clean the cylinder walls up. I'm gonna use ATF for cleaning and ATF for lubing as well. I used to run WD-40 back in the day for the ring break-in. I'm sure either works fine. It's recommended to use ATF, and I just always have ATF here at the shop. So my dad actually is the one who, pretty sure is my dad, who runs WD-40 for cylinder wall lube. The reason you don't want to run engine oil is because you're trying to get the rings broken in as fast as possible into the cylinder walls. When they get honed, there's a cross hatch applied, and that is what seats the rings. Wipe them out a few different times with ATF, make sure there's no gunk on the rag. We can go ahead and get them lubed up. So what I do, I just put some in the cap here. Get some ATF on your finger and kind of swirl her around down the block, down the bore. It's fine if you get it on the deck up here. We're going to be cleaning that before the head goes on, of course. Same concept over here. I'm going to go ahead and lube up mainly the skirts of the piston just to get a little extra lube on there. All this is going to burn off probably within seconds of firing this thing up. So of course you don't need a crazy amount on here. I went and read you guys' comments on, I think it was a video 2 days ago when we did that paint work on the bay, or the fenders I guess, to match the bay. And I don't think there was a single comment that said, yo, that looks like crap, you need to respray the bay. So I'm gonna listen to you guys on this one. I know I am a perfectionist. Sometimes it just kills all the progress with the build. Of course, I like my stuff as nice as possible, but at some point you just need to accept that it's not 100% and that it's very, very, very close to 100%, and just go ahead and put this thing together. So that's gonna save me about 2 days of work not repainting the bay, and obviously the money savings as well is nice. So I just wanted to say I appreciate your guys' feedback on that. Cool, those are ready to go. We need to pop off all of the caps and we can start dropping these guys down in there. I find it easier to lube this bearing right here before it goes into the block. Once it's down in there and on the crank, it's kind of a pain to get to. So toss some lube on now. This is hole number 1. We have a true actual 86.5 mil compressor, which is going to be nice. Now, if your pistons are not marked, just remember the bigger valve reliefs are the intake. On a 4G, the intake is on the back of the engine. So let's drop her down in the hole. Can get her lined up like so. And with a quality compressor, beautiful. If there's any sort of binding, it's most likely your ring's getting caught up. So go ahead and pull the piston back out and make sure that ring didn't pop. So everything is in. We can go ahead, flip it over, tap on the rod caps, get them torqued, and we have a short block, my friends. A freaking short block. So 2 and 3 are at the bottom. We can go ahead and get these caps on right now. Once again, bearing tang to bearing tang. Just double check the markings. That's good there. 3, 3. Alrighty, let's rotate her and get 1 and 4 installed. Well, friends, I was not expecting this either, but we have another clearance issue. The rods do not clear the block. Man, oh man, this is more than I bargained for. I'm going to figure out what all needs to be clearanced. I am completely out of time for the night. I was hoping to at least get the short block done, but as you guys can see, I'm running into all sorts of hurdles. But I just want to figure out exactly what needs to be clearanced. So hopefully we can pop in tomorrow, completely disassemble this thing again, and get it clearanced. What a pain. Hole 2 is completely fine. Plenty of clearance there. It looks like hole 3 hits. I'm not sure about 1 and 4 yet, but man, oh man. What a pain. You know, for now I'm just gonna unbolt the girdle so I can get a better visual as to what's going on. Oh yeah, very, very clearly hitting right there. That bridge right there hits a lot. That one's gonna clear. Ain't gonna have no problem there. No problem on that side. So it's just one spot. Wow. I can see why too. It sticks out quite a bit farther than the other sides. So those markings right down in there, you can clearly see the rod sitting on the block right now. Everything else looks like it's gonna clear just fine. But man, oh man, I definitely was not expecting or anticipating this level of mods on the block today. Not a big deal. I wish we could just go ahead and clearance it right now, but it's gonna fill this block with metal shavings. It's quite a bit of material we're gonna have to take off. So this whole thing's gotta come back apart, be clearanced, re-cleaned, and reassembled, which sucks. But that is what it is. While I'm in here, I'm gonna do the oil squirters as well, just to see what we gotta do there. But that's tomorrow. Goodbye.